So as you know, Dr. Brunstetter received a bachelor's degree in molecular biology from Grove City College, and then his optometry, master's, and PhD degrees here. He also has an executive MBA, because he didn't have quite enough letters after his name, from the Naval Postgraduate School, Graduate School of Business and Public Policy. So he served as principal investigator at the Naval Aerospace Medical Research Lab in Pensacola, Florida, studying night and dynamic visual acuity, eye movement patterns of aviators, and G tolerance and endurance. He revised the U.S. Navy's unaided night vision training course, and that system permitted students to dark adapt in real time and experience visual illusions and disorientation unique to the night flight environment. At the Naval Air Systems Command, he was the systems engineer for the almost $8 million Joint Service Advanced Laser Eye Protection Visor program. He also served as research director for the U.S. Navy Refractive Surgery program. His studies in that role permitted data-driven decisions in the Department of Defense regarding optimal refractive surgery protocols for service members. And the results of his 500-subject LASIK in naval aviation study directly led to the approval of LASIK for U.S. naval aviators and air crew. So imagine the people who thought they couldn't pursue that kind of career, and thanks to Dr. Brunstetter's work, found that they could. That's page one. Not double-sided. Amidst all the other achievements, he was detailed to the NASA Johnson Space Center Space Medicine Operations Division as a Department of Defense Aerospace Medical Liaison Officer to support the investigation and mitigation of a unique condition affecting the eyes, which I think is what he's going to talk about today. The eyes, brains, and vision of astronauts during spaceflight-associated neuro-ocular syndrome. And I know you've all been thinking about space and astronauts of late, so I couldn't believe how great it was that Tyson was going to become our speaker. But I will tell you that I think the other thing Dr. Brunstetter has done, which wouldn't be reflected in his formal bio sketch, is he's put optometry front and center in front of all these various military studies and work, and now he's retired, but he's at NASA. And I think that when I think about optometry and our graduate program and Ohio State University being represented by Tyson Brunstetter to the Department of Defense and military colleagues, kudos, young man. It's just absolutely fantastic. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tyson Brunstetter.
Thank you so much, Carla. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I don't like my bio. I don't like having it read right next to me, but I understand it. And so thank you so much for the warm welcome. And thank you so much for this incredible honor. To be a speaker for a Hill lecture is really the pinnacle that I think folks strive for. For me, it goes further than that. When I was here at Ohio State, sitting in similar seats, but much older seats, I was privileged enough to pursue a master's degree under Barbara Fink, but immediately beside Dr. Fink was Dr. Hill. He spent so much time with me, this young person who really had no idea how to conduct research. And he showed me the way, he showed me the path, he showed me how to publish. I desperately looked for photos that I could show here today. Then I realized that I'd moved 7 times since I graduated, and pictures were in boxes everywhere. So I did find this handwritten note from Dr. Hill, letting me know that our publication was on the way. It was not accepted by this point, but received by the Journal of the American Optometric Association back in '99. And of course, we had some revisions to do. So he was the dean when I first arrived here in 1993. So this being here today means a great deal. So I really do appreciate that. It was about at this time when life was in black and white, as you can see. I don't think we had color film back then. But I swore into the U.S. Navy. I don't have a military background. It was a leap of faith. I thought, well, this will reduce my student loan debt. It'll ease up my financial burdens. And so I signed up and I thought, well, I'm just going to do one tour. I'll get out. I'll probably come back to Ohio and see patients. But at that time, the Navy said, well, we would like you to pursue a PhD. And I thought, well, maybe, I've learned a lot from Doctors Fink and Hill. Maybe I need to look into another area that may be a little more applicable to military, especially military aviation. And so I then worked with Dr. Fote, who, it must have been more recent because it's in color here. But what a great experience to be working with Nick for those years, and another incredible mentor. So armed with this, I then went to the U.S. Navy. I realized that I didn't quite I couldn't understand naval aviation without wings. And so I was able to go through the Naval Aerospace Optometry course. I got my wings. It allowed me to fly any DoD aircraft with 2 sets of controls. I worked mainly research, development, test, and evaluation during that time. And eventually in 2016, I was approached to serve at Johnson Space Center, which of course I said yes. So arrived there, but we also had the opportunity to come back to Ohio State on different occasions. And one of those was helping to validate a new goggle-based visual field device that had been developed for NASA. So Jenny and Nick Fote and team came together and helped to validate that system. And then we on the other side took it on the Vomit Comet and used a few bags in the process, but just one example of those great collaborations over the years of us all working together. I would not be where I am today. I would certainly not be at NASA if I didn't have my OD, my PhD, and my wings, without a doubt. So anyway, we're not here to talk about me, but I wanted to give a little background. I wanted to definitely show that connection, appreciation for Dr. Hill and all the experiences that I gained from Ohio State. So as you know, you might recognize a few of these people here as the folks, excuse me, who recently went around the moon, the Artemis II crew. So as you know, astronauts are now venturing outside of the Earth's protective magnetic cocoon and outside of the Earth's gravitational fields. So that return to the moon is called the Artemis program, as you're probably very, very well aware. We had just a really successful mission here in the last couple weeks. But from there, from the moon as a base, the plan is to go to Mars, humans to Mars. Now, the critical difference here is the duration of the mission will drastically change to a period of time that humans have never been outside of Earth's atmosphere. Duration will be between 2.25 and 3 years, but keep in mind, you have no option of an early return. When you've left, you're gone for the next 2.25, 3 years. You can't pull over at the nearest urgent care facility. If you get a foreign body in your eye, well, it's on you. You and your crew have to figure out how to solve that problem. So you can imagine there are absolutely unprecedented challenges in engineering, but also in health and human performance. And so I've listed some of the top human risks to these exploration missions. One is radiation. This one will be a big one. What about behavioral health? Could you imagine being in a small tin can with your spouse for 3 years? Your dog, your cat? I mean, fill in the blank. Could you imagine being in a very small enclosed space for 3 years? That will be a great, great challenge. What about in-flight medical conditions? What if you develop appendicitis? What will you do? Or what if you develop a venous thromboembolism, which we have diagnosed in more than one crew on board the ISS, particularly in the left internal jugular vein? This is considered to be one of the two top risks to human spaceflight, as well as spaceflight-associated neuro-ocular syndrome, or SANS, and that is the area where I study. So over the years, I've collected various SANS headlines, and if you take a look at all the headlines, they're a little bit negative. I think the more important one is a Mars mission showstopper. Eye problems, eyes at risk, blinded by space, vision problems, eyeball squashing on the ISS. Spacemen on the way to Mars will have to wear swimming goggles to save their sight. Interesting, but there's a little bit of truth in there. So the eyes and vision of astronauts have been examined at pre-flight and post-flight in all crew members ever since the mid-1960s of the Gemini era. And for the decades since then, there have been many anecdotal reports from crew members of in-flight vision changes. It never really rose up to the level of great concern, but keep in mind these missions were all, for the most part, short duration missions, usually 14 days or less. But hundreds and hundreds of people have flown in space in short duration conditions. Everything changed in 2005. That's when the very first SANS case was discovered in our optometry clinic at Johnson Space Center. It took, as you can imagine, it took a few years to realize that this wasn't a condition affecting one crew member. It was affecting the population. So it took, we don't send that many people to the ISS. So it took quite a long period of time to realize this affects the population. The result was in 2010, the establishment of a new series of ocular visual tests and beyond, including MRI. These occurred not only pre-flight and post-flight, but also in-flight, critically in-flight for the first time. And I will say the current core battery of tests that we perform in-flight have been performed since 2013. So roughly 12 or 13 years or so. And you can see in the pictures at the bottom some examples of some of the ocular testing that we perform, like visual acuity, ocular ultrasound, fundus photography, and OCT. There are 4 primary signs associated with SANS. I call them the big 4: optic disc edema, chorioretinal folds, globe flattening, and hyperopic shifts in refractive error. So if you take a look at the image here, the color photo, you can clearly see this area surrounding the optic nerve head that's blurred. It's blurred because of optic disc edema, and actually that optic nerve head is protruded towards you from the screen if you could see it in 3 dimensions. Over here is an OCT cross-sectional image right through the foveal area of a crew member, and you could see the jagged choroidal folds at the bottom and some retinal folds at the top. You can imagine that one of the risks due to foveal choroidal folds would be metamorphopsia or distorted central vision. Luckily, we haven't detected that yet in any crew members. Down here in the lower right are post-flight MRI of the globes, and you can clearly see the flattening that can occur in our crew members. Now, what about the symptoms of SANS? Well, unless you as a crew member notice vision changes, you're basically asymptomatic. No issues whatsoever. So here's an actual SANS case. So this is a pre-flight image. These are multicolor images that we capture with OCT. And you can see normal optic nerve heads here, both the right eye and left eye in the crew member. This we published back in 2024. So if you're more interested in a full case report, you can find that. But take a look. I will jump from pre-flight to in-flight. So notice any changes there? So for the right eye, which is on the left side, you can see optic disc edema. You can see that blurring of the optic nerve head margin. You can also see what almost looks like a fingerprint here. Those are retinal and choroidal folds. On the left eye, you can see an actual protrusion of the optic nerve head with a blurred margin, as well as some chorioretinal folds as well. These were taken around flight day 90 to flight day 150 while in flight. So I'll go back to pre-flight, normal, to in flight there in one of our more severe cases. So the prevalence of SANS, now this covers all levels of severity. This goes from just a trace of, say, optic disc edema all the way up to severe levels. So, and these are composed of just NASA ISS long duration crew members, data collected from July 2000, around the beginning of the ISS, to May 2025. So 69% of all these ISS crew members are diagnosed with some level of optic disc edema, again, from very mild trace up to more severe. 25% diagnosed with chorioretinal folds, 37% with significant globe flattening, and then 20% with refractive error shifts greater than half of a diopter. Overall, the prevalence of SANS, one or more of these findings are found in 81% of crew members. So the vast majority of crew members who fly long duration space flight. But clinically concerning SANS is only diagnosed in about 16% of ISS long duration crew members. What does this mean? Well, they've reached the level of, let's say, optic disc edema that meets our threshold of clinically concerning. That means they might have chorioretinal folds encroaching in the macular foveal area. They may be reaching the point where their refractive error shift is getting close to the maximum amount of prescription power that we've given them in their backup bag. So at this point, it requires additional monitoring. So we typically see them about once a month. We oftentimes perform OCT and multicolor imaging in them. Sometimes we perform Amsler grid if there are chorioretinal folds in the fovea. This would also be the flag for countermeasures. We'll talk about countermeasures and treatment in a moment. Now, we do see other ocular signs in crew members during flight. We occasionally see cotton wool spots. You can see an example of that in the upper right here. We don't see that very often. I've seen one case in the last 10 years. We occasionally see retinal hemorrhages. Not very often. I've seen one case in the last 10 years. We see very frequently signs of venous overload choroidopathy. And that would include retinal cystoid spaces like the red asterisks here on the right, or retinal pigment epithelial detachments, or PEDs. We see these two, the cysts and the PEDs, I'm guessing somewhere around 20 to 25% of crew members. That indicates that there's something going on with choroid, pachychoroid in particular, and that's causing some issues in the ability of the RPE to pump fluid back into the choroid from the retina. Very rarely we'll see serous chorioretinopathy. We have seen it one time in flight during my 10 years there, and one time post-flight, which occurred in a crew member who had a PED in that location in flight. And there is some evidence, some suggested evidence that there are choroidal anastomoses that form in crew members due to long duration space flight. We're about to perform a study to look more closely at that. What that would tell us is that if there are anastomoses formed in these locations that you and I probably don't have, it indicates a physical and anatomical modification to the vascular system of the choroid in response to what we'll talk about in a minute, but most likely some type of a venous outflow obstruction or resistance. Now, if we see choroidal anastomoses, what else could be happening, say, in the brain? Because we do see brain changes with long duration spaceflight as well. We have diagnosed retinoschisis in one case due to ocular ultrasound on orbit. And then we routinely see just a small amount of optic nerve sheath distension. Now, some of these may or may not be associated with SANS, but we have to keep an open mind at the possibility. So why do we think this is happening? Well, let's focus on long duration missions. So on board the ISS, it's typically 6 to 12 months of duration. So we're all astronauts. We fly up on our spacecraft and we go into microgravity. And so the very first thing that happens, you get a headward fluid shift. So about 1 to 2 liters of fluid wants to move from your lower extremities when you're in gravity. Gravity's pulling that fluid down. Once you're in microgravity, the fluid can move upward and it tries to uniformly distribute within the body. So that means 1 to 2 liters of fluid moving from your lower extremities up towards your head. And so my really terrible joke that I've been using for a decade is this weekend when you get your Domino's pizza and your 2 liter of Coke, imagine trying to shove 2 liters of fluid into your skull. Something's going to give. So what gives? Well, you can see right there these two crew member examples. Peggy at the top, of course, pre-flight is on the left for both, and in-flight is on the right. If you look at Peggy, she almost looks like she has an ocular allergy. Her eyes are a little bit puffy, but that's the fluid shift. If you take a look at Chell, good-looking guy on the ground, but he kind of puffs up like a watermelon. And this is one of the better pictures. Shell's an awesome guy, but I do pick on him for his fluid shifts. But he is a very good example of all that fluid going up into the head. So what happens is we know for sure this fluid shift causes vascular congestion. Your internal jugular vein expands greatly. It's very, very increased in diameter. The choroid thickens in all crew members on average. You may have little areas where it thins, but overall, on average, the choroid thickens, which of course can cause the PEDs, the cysts, et cetera, et cetera. What we don't know for sure is, and that's why there's a dotted line there, is what happens to intracranial pressure. Our best guess based on terrestrial data and parabolic flight data is that intracranial pressure may mildly elevate, but it's sustained. What I mean by that is there was a parabolic flight study that used 0 Gs in folks who had an Amira reservoir implanted in their ventricles. They were able to directly measure intracranial pressure. What they found was when the subjects were on the ground, like for example, when we were asleep last night laying in bed, our intracranial pressure is pretty much maximum at that point for the day. But as soon as you get up and you start moving and standing, gravity pulls fluid down, your intracranial pressure goes to basically a minimum. So you get relief. It's high at night and then low during the day. You get relief. Well, what they found in this parabolic flight study is that the intracranial pressure in these subjects was somewhere between supine high and vertical terrestrially, somewhere in the middle. But the difference is they can't stand up in space. You can't get that relief. So our best guess is that intracranial pressure is mildly elevated, not the pathological levels like idiopathic intracranial hypertension, but mildly elevated and sustained. You don't get that relief. Regardless of the path, the big 4 signs of SANS is what's produced. And keep in mind, like we saw with the prevalence numbers, it can be an a la carte. You can pick and choose kind of what SANS signs you want to have. And they are so random in many ways that it doesn't allow us to kind of figure out what causes what. Are they caused by the same source, or it makes it very interesting, very challenging, but very, very frustrating. And have such low sample sizes compounds the issue. So the very first manuscript on SANS was written in 2011. I've told this story today to some folks, but I was in my Navy khakis in San Diego, and I read the manuscript, and I thought, this is amazing. I need to learn more about this. And then I laid it down, and I told myself, but it's NASA; they'll figure it out in 6 months. And obviously, it's not that easy. It's not just intracranial pressure. It's not just venous congestion. It's probably multifactorial. And there are also brain structural changes that I won't go into today because of the amount of time we have. But the lateral ventricles, for example, will increase in size by about 10 to 15% due to long duration spaceflight. And the brain position will actually shift upward in the skull if you take a look at MRIs pre-flight to in-flight. So there are brain structural changes as well. The changes are not visible on short duration crew members. So duration plays a role. And there may be other factors. Altered sleep, like sleep apnea on the ground, will elevate intracranial pressure. When you're up in space, if you don't have good circulation, you can create CO2 pockets right there in front of your face that doesn't move. Convection doesn't occur in space. And if you breathe in high amounts of CO2, that's a potent vasodilator. It can compound these issues. And then there's a one carbon metabolism theory from a genetic standpoint that is also being suggested as a factor in SANS. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So you've probably already put this together in your own mind, but there are in-flight and long-term health risks associated with SANS. You can have visual field defects because of the optic disc edema. Those can be temporary or permanent. You can have central vision distortions due to the chorioretinal folds in the fovea. You can have retinal atrophy because of chronic choroidal folds disrupting the RPE. Choroidal neovascularization because of the same reason. Potential cognitive decline and neurodegenerative disease as well, for example, Alzheimer's or dementia. Luckily, we have not detected any permanent loss of vision in any crew members. We have not detected retinal atrophy or anything at that level in crew members for durations of 6 to 12 months with a limited sample size. So let's talk about how we collect those data. So this is just a general overview of some of the primary tests that we perform. I thought this audience might be interested in that. So you can see them listed on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I list when exactly we perform these tests. So we've got, of course, pre-flight. We collect all the data on pre-flight, all the data on post-flight, but we can't send an MRI into space, so it'd be a little heavy, and the whole magnet thing could cause some problems. And so some of these tests are only performed on orbit, and some aren't. So, oh yeah, real quick. So FD30, that stands for flight day 30, flight day 90, and then R minus 30 is 30 days before return. So return minus 30 days. So 3 tests of MRI of the brain and orbits. Comprehensive eye exam, you can see what we do. I think most people agree that this is a reasonable list, and that includes optical biometry and the OCT, of course, which establishes our baseline OCT for follow-up imaging on board the ISS. Multicolor imaging is used on orbit as our basic retinal photography method. It saves us a lot of time from having to pull out the traditional fundoscope, and we found that it allows us to diagnose any of the same SANS signs that we would diagnose normally with color photography. Visual field, we do it, traditional 24-2, so the standard Humphrey, pre-flight and post-flight, but we just recently were able to deploy the Oculus Smart Field that you see on the right-hand side to the ISS because it's a relatively small footprint device. So we've sent that up there to determine whether or not we actually see visual field defects due to spaceflight in that environment. It got up there in September, and we ran it through its paces. We call it activation and checkout in October, so it's ready to go for any clinically concerning cases. Vision screening, Christina, actually this is, she just went around the moon, but this is a photo from her days on board the ISS several years ago. And I just love her post, float right there. Words I never thought I'd hear my eye doctor say. It wasn't me. I'm not a remote guider for visual acuity, but how cool would that be? And you could tell we have solved the problem of test distance for near. We use a string. It works really well. For distance, a little bit harder because you have to float right here, and that's not exactly easy sometimes. But we get decent data. We measure visual acuity at distance and at near, corrected and uncorrected, and we do a vision questionnaire as well. What symptoms are you experiencing? Have you changed your glasses to a higher power? Do you hear pulsatile tinnitus or other signs that would suggest elevated intracranial pressure? And we also perform AMSR grid because of the chorioretinal fold risk. OCT, this is our workhorse. We love the OCT. It gives us definitely the best quality data that we obtain. Retinal photography, you can see our old school retinal camera there, but as I mentioned, we have since moved over to multicolor imaging from the OCT, and it works extremely well. Very, very happy with that. Ocular ultrasound, you can see Johnny Kim, who flew, I guess that was last year. He is performing ocular ultrasound on himself, and this is, I love giving this example here. So when you think about spaceflight, you almost always have to spin your brain. You have to think a little bit differently. And so this at this one ocular ultrasound session, many years ago before I was at NASA in 2016, there was an astronaut on board the ISS about to perform ocular ultrasound. And his name is Don Pettit. When you think of astronauts, you think smart people. They're here. Don Pettit is up here. He's freakishly smart. He has designed, this is a total tangent, he has designed a totally open coffee mug that you can use in space. It doesn't spill the coffee. You can float around, you can go upside down, you can do whatever you want. The coffee does not come out. And you can sip it like you normally would on the ground. So you can look it up. I think he has a patent on it. In case you want to buy one for your next space flight. I'm not sure it's a big money maker at this point, but that's the level of thinking he is at. So imagine you were the remote guider. You're the person remotely guiding Don Pettit in ocular ultrasound. You're down in mission control. He's up on board ISS. And Don says, hey, why are we using ultrasound gel for this? And of course, the remote guider said, well, you need a medium. You can't just use the probe. It doesn't work that way. And Don said, well, I understand all that. Why aren't we using water? And the remote guider thought, wait a minute, that's a really good idea. Sure enough, you take water in space, you squirt it right here in front of the eye, and it stays. It adheres just like ultrasound gel would. It's a little less messy, and it gives beautiful images. And so we always use water now. But you know, it's $35. What's the big deal? You could $35 to buy a 12-pack of ultrasound gel from Amazon. What's the big deal? You order it and you have it delivered. Well, the problem is shipping and handling is $150,000. It's about $10,000 to $20,000 per pound. And you can't use ultrasound gel for really any other purpose. So the point of the story is that you have to be very careful what you deploy, and it has to, to the best of your abilities, has to be useful in other ways, not just ultrasound gel. Now, the good news is if we spent all that money, the good news is there are free returns. So maybe we'll get that money back. And then tonometry. You can see the note there. ESA is the European Space Agency. That's the only agency that requires us to measure intraocular pressure routinely. Otherwise, it's as clinically indicated in everyone else. Now, why is that? Why wouldn't we measure intraocular pressure? It's important, right? We measure it all the time in eye exams. So here's where the balance is. We don't just walk up to the NASA engineers who run NASA. We don't just walk up to them and say, we have an OCT device, we'd like to deploy it, and we'd like 40 minutes of your crew member time. Actually, that happened in about 2012, and the engineers said, well, what are you going to give up? And so all the SANS people got together and they thought, well, we're not seeing a whole lot of significance with our tonometry data, so we can give up that time in order to deploy OCT and get that time. I've heard estimates of the amount of money per hour for one astronaut is about $100,000. So you think you make some good money? It's about $100,000 per hour per crew member. And for many of these, you can see we have 2 crew members performing tonometry. So we have to worry about cost. Crew member time is probably the most precious commodity up there. And in space, we have to be able to pack these devices away. And ISS is relatively big. So we have the luxury of sending an OCT up there. We won't be able to send spectralis to the moon, I don't think, or to Mars. So we're developing miniaturized OCT device for that. So that's why we don't perform tonometry all the time on NASA crew members. So countermeasure strategies. So we have the same flow chart. Honestly, the only true effective countermeasure we have are space anticipation glasses. Those are glasses of extra positive power that we send with the crew members for their mission. So on the ground, Bob Gibson is our clinical optometrist. He is the astronauts' optometrist. He will do a cycloplegic refraction. He'll look at the age of the crew member, look at the previous missions that they have, and he'll decide how many pair of space anticipation glasses to deploy with them. The very first pair of space anticipation glasses is half a diopter more plus than the baseline. And if you have more, it's plus a half and then plus a half. We send up to 3 pair per crew member if we feel that they need it. And it works. If you notice your vision is changing, it's always in the hyperopic direction. So you put on your first pair of SAGs and see if it works. And if it does, you're good to go. So it is an effective countermeasure. No one has lost visual acuity due to SANS if they have the right prescription in front of their eyes. All of these other ones are unproven or currently under investigation. So you can see lower body negative pressure in the upper left. You can see how big it is, and a crew member is not able to move about the cabin space and do their job if they're in a device like that. The Russians on their side of the station, they actually have a lower body negative pressure device called the Chibis, but it's literally bolted into the ground. So maybe someday we find that it is an effective countermeasure. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but the logistics of the crew members being able to do their job is greatly affected by that. So a veno-constrictive thigh cuffs is another option where I call them loose-fitting tourniquets that you wear high on your thigh. What it does is I think we're around 30 millimeters of mercury. It's enough to allow arterial flow down into your legs, but it restricts some of that venous return up to the heart. And again, we haven't found the prescription that actually works yet, so we're in the process of that. Hopefully, it will be an effective countermeasure, but we're not there yet. B, vitamin complex, that if the one carbon metabolism theory is correct, the correction is as simple as taking B vitamin complex. So we have an in-flight study going on where crew members just take B vitamins, and then we're measuring, excuse me, we're measuring them with OCT and all the other tests to see if it's effective. And so we'll see what the results show. We also have thigh cuffs up there right now as well, running a study to see if they're effective if they're worn for 6 hours a day. 6 hours a day. Pharmaceuticals, Diamox, of course, lowers intracranial pressure, but as you know, it also lowers intraocular pressure. So if SANS is a translaminar pressure gradient issue and we give them Diamox, is it going to make SANS better or worse or not have any effect at all? And you all know how evil Diamox is. No one likes to take Diamox, especially in therapeutic dosages. It's not like we're talking symptomatic crew members here. They're happy as clams for the most part. So imagine trying to convince your crew member to take Diamox when they don't notice any problems at all. But you're making it worse with this drug. There is some suggestion that a GLP-1 receptor agonist, exenatide in particular, might lower intracranial pressure modestly. So we're about to run a strict head-down tilt study in Cologne, Germany next year to see if it's helpful. That 6-degree head-down tilt analog is it is a research setting that has produced SANS-like optic disc edema and chorioretinal folds. So it seems to be a pretty good research analog. And then this device called an ocular pressure adjusting pump. It looks like you might have a hard time seeing it. It does look like those swimming goggles that I mentioned at the beginning. These are FDA approved to treat glaucoma if it's used to cause a vacuum in front of the eye. So you wear it for a certain period of time every day, vacuum, that in turn lowers the intraocular pressure, which in theory stabilizes the translaminar pressure gradient and reduces glaucoma effects. If SANS isn't a mild elevation in intraocular pressure, we actually need to increase the intraocular pressure to match. And so we have a version of this, the OPAP Plus, that provides positive pressure that we just did a head-down tilt study to see in a pilot study to see if it's helpful. So that one's TBD, but we hope to deploy it in the next year or two. So predicting SANS. So there's a huge variability across crew members from a SANS perspective. Some are more severe than others. Some of them don't seem to have any signs at all. If we talked about 8 years ago, I would say that SANS is a male-only condition. We know now that's absolutely not true. It's males and females. That we were a victim of small sample sizes, especially a relatively low number of females flying. About that same time period 8 years ago, I would have said SANS is a right eye biased condition. We know that is not true either. Again, small sample sizes. We diagnose it in novice and veteran crew members across various ages, body types, body weights, BMIs. You can pretty much name it, and we have not found any way to predict who will develop SANS on their first mission. Yes, Jeff?
Did it consistently develop SANS if they develop one time? Or is it off and on for individuals?
Great question. So the question was, do they repeat this? Do they repeat sands on subsequent missions? Well, we were thinking along the same lines. And so we performed an analysis. This wasn't meant to be hardcore research. This was just looking at a small sample size, just looking at how SANS repeats. We didn't expect to find anything. So at the time, 16 US crew members had flown one long duration mission, followed by a subsequent long duration mission, both on board the ISS. So you can see the graph here. 16 crew members flew twice. The typical separation between the missions was about 5 years. That's kind of typical. So let's take a look at the 16 crew members as they fly their first mission. 6 out of 16 were diagnosed with SANS. 10 out of 16 were not diagnosed with SANS. So now let's focus on the SANS cases. They flew their second mission. How many do you think were diagnosed with SANS? How many do you think were non-SANS cases? Every single one of them was diagnosed with SANS again. So let's look at the non-SANS cases from the first mission. They flew again. How many do you think were diagnosed with SANS? Just one. 1 out of 10. So we ran the stats. The probability of this happening completely by chance is less than 0.001 with a sample size of 16. So we were amazed by this. So the bottom line here is if you were a previous SANS case, you will be another SANS case in a future flight. And if you were a non-SANS case, you're highly, highly likely of being a non-SANS case in the future. Then we took it a step further. We looked at our OCT data, and we all created a metric, an objective measurement of optic disc edema. We call it delta TRT. What that is we measure the total retinal thickness immediately around the optic nerve head. Look at that thickness pre-flight, and then compare it to how it changes in flight. And that's our direct measure of optic disc edema. So we call it delta TRT, the change in total retinal thickness, pre-flight to in-flight to post-flight. And so if you look at the graph here, notice we only have 5 crew members on this. We only had 5 crew members with good quality delta TRT data from mission 1 on the x-axis to mission 2 on the y-axis. If you look closely, it's 10 eyes from 5 crew members. What you notice is that we've got 3 crew members down here. Those were non-SANS cases. And then up here towards the upper right, we had 2 SANS cases. And it's pretty clear that the level of optic disc edema of the first mission is highly predictive of the second mission within, I would say, 10 to 15 microns. It's incredibly predictive. And you can see the correlation value of 0.94, again, 10 eyes and 5 crew members. So that was a big, I think, a big finding. And so we're using that now. We now are able to talk to crew members and say, well, this is what happened on your last mission, so we expect the same thing to happen on your future mission. And so far, it's holding up very, very well. So with that, it seems like people actually have a SANS fingerprint. What you look like on your first mission will be very similar to your subsequent mission, across the repeat flights. And it applies to crew members who have an asymmetry. So they weren't included in that analysis, but we've had a couple crew members. One of them had more SANS signs on the right side. They flew again and it looked identical. We had another crew member that was the opposite. It was a left eye bias. They flew again and it looked exactly the same. Yes?
And then they're having the exact effect, or is there kind of a residual between it?
That's That's a great question. I wish we could talk for 3 hours, 8 hours. Give me 8 hours. So the question was, is there residual signs left over between those missions, or does it all resolve? So the optic disc edema in all crew members does resolve. Depending on the severity, it takes between weeks to months to a little bit more than a year in the more severe cases. But they resolve, they get back to baseline. If you have mild globe flattening, shifts in refractive error, or chorioretinal folds, if they're mild, they will resolve in between missions. But if they're moderate to severe, they will probably persist. They might backtrack just a little bit, but they will persist. And Bob Gibson, our clinical optometrist, he actually diagnosed choroidal folds in a NASA crew member who last flew in Skylab in the mid-1970s. So we presume that was due to long-duration spaceflight back then, even though we didn't have OCT, of course, back then. So in this case, when we diagnose SANS, it's got to have a delta. It's got to have a change. So if someone has chorioretinal folds before their second mission, they have to get worse before we flag that as a SANS case. And of course, the edema comes back. So it's got to be a delta from that new baseline. So everyone seems to have a SANS fingerprint across repeat flights, and if it's asymmetric, it still respects that asymmetry flight to flight. And so this distinct repeatability suggests, at least to me, that there's some physical, some anatomical factor or factors that is a primary driver of SANS pathophysiology. My personal guess is it's venous anatomy that is driving it. Could be optic canal diameter. I mean, it could be anything. But at least we know that this is a fingerprint, and we need to look at these anatomical differences. But we've got that wide variability, so how do we tease apart these anatomical differences between people? It makes it very difficult, especially with the sample sizes. So this is brand new. I think this is the second time I've presented these data. It's not published yet, but it will be later this year. We looked at clustering of SANS optic disc edema. What do I mean by that? Well, we looked at 54 ISS long-duration crew members, and we looked at data from 2013 to 2025. In other words, as long as the OCT's been up on orbit, we use those data. And for the sake of time, I won't get into the full analysis, but the first analysis was to look at the data, the objective optic disc edema data over the period of a mission, and determining if there's any clustering. Do we see any groups? And then number two, if we find groups, then let's take a look at the trajectory of those groups over the period of the mission and see if there's any trajectory that we can see. And so, lo and behold, we identified 3 distinct clusters of the crew member population for optic disc edema. And we call them SANS resistant, mild responders, and SANS susceptible crew members. Each of these clusters displays a very distinct course throughout their mission. And so here they are. So on the x-axis, you can see pre-flight is the baseline. So that is 0 because we're looking at delta TRT, the change in total retinal thickness. So baseline is by definition 0 for everybody. And then in flight, you can see the days going by there. The green represent the SANS resistant group. Now, if you look at the gray band on the lower portion of this, that is the test variability for OCT and crew members. We put them in various different poses, measure them 4 months, separation in time on the ground. We figured out the test variability is plus or minus 20 microns. And you can see that this group stays typically within the variability of the test itself. So we do not consider them to be developing optic disc edema. The mild responders, you can see they have a slightly different trajectory. It's kind of a gentle progressive increase, almost a linear increase over time, but it never gets above this green area, which we call the earliest indication of SANS. So it's mild. It's like you have a temperature of 99 degrees. Technically, that's a fever, but is it really? Are you really concerned? No, you just monitor that a little bit more closely because you may get worse. So that's kind of our 99-degree group there in the yellow. Then the red represent the SANS susceptible folks. Those are the folks who, by flight day 30, which is the first time point for us for data collection, they are already in the clinically concerning zone. And they tend to follow a trajectory where they peak in optic disc edema around flight day 90 to 120, and then they may slightly come down in severity. Never goes down to the point where it's benign without risk, but for some reason, some physiological change occurs where, or some compensation occurs where the edema reduces slightly. And then we also have folks who, that might be hard to see, but we call these the SANS outliers. We do measure delta TRT up here in the over 200 microns and above. They're in kind of a realm all by themselves. But anyone who is SANS susceptible, we instantly know who they are by flight day 30. So how do we put this all together? Well, we look at that SANS fingerprint. We need to find that anatomical or physical difference between crew members, but the data are all noisy. So what we found here is what we need to do is to combine that information. We need to look for a physical anatomical difference, but we need to remove some of that noise. And so what we plan to do, this is our next step, is to compare the SANS susceptible to the SANS resistant. What makes them different? And we eliminate all these folks, the majority of crew members here in the middle, who add a lot of noise to the analysis. And with that, we hope to find that critical difference between the groups that drive SANS pathophysiology. So bottom line messages, currently no evidence of cognitive impairment due to those brain anatomical changes or any permanent vision loss in any crew members. However, about 81% of ISS crew members are diagnosed with SANS of all severities, from mild to more substantial. Only about 16% develop what we call clinically concerning SANS. Predicting SANS, we still can't predict it reliably in folks who have never flown before. However, we do know that SANS repeats or non-SANS repeats, and so that has helped us out a great deal. Terrestrial analog, I mentioned that strict head-down tilt studies is a great terrestrial analog. We typically run these for at least 30 days or 60 days. If you live in Russia, maybe 6 months. We haven't gone that long, but it does produce SANS-like signs, optic disc edema, chorioretinal folds, and it allows us to very rapidly test potential countermeasures or to figure out what prescription is necessary for a particular countermeasure for a particular person. We might be able to use this to accelerate our knowledge. SANS severity is related to mission duration. So for short duration missions, by definition, that's 30 days or less. So that would be all Space Shuttle, all Apollo, Gemini, all those. That's a green risk. In fact, we don't even collect data for missions less than 30 days because by the time we decide that this is a SANS case, they're already coming back to 1G, and that's the ultimate countermeasure. It's considered a yellow risk for long duration missions, greater than 30 days, up to 12 months. There are still outliers. There are still people who definitely could use a countermeasure once we determine them. But most of the crew members are not at substantial risk at this point in time. It's really a red risk for Mars. And so we need to figure out SANS, I think, from an ethical standpoint before we ever consider sending our astronauts to Mars. And we do truly believe that all the efforts that we're putting into SANS will benefit you all in terrestrial medicine. So what we're doing are like advanced analytics with OCT, for example. We're miniaturizing devices like the OCT. We're working with Heidelberg to miniaturize a device to the size of a large pair of binoculars. We're actually testing it out right now at JSC. And keep in mind that they have to be small in order to go in small capsules, or else it won't go at all. And they have to be semi-autonomous because crew members on the way to Mars may experience a round trip comm delay of 45 minutes. So I could be sitting down on the ground saying, okay, press the button on the tono pen, and it'll be 45 minutes before I get confirmation that they pressed it. And of course, it'll time out before that time. You get my point. We can't remotely guide them. They've got to be able to do this themselves. We have new objective-based definitions of optic nerve head disease. And of course, NASA is incredible at telemedicine technology and techniques. And all that, of all of my looking for headlines, this is the only positive one I've found. Researchers are learning more about eyes thanks to astronauts. That's the only positive one I have. So thank you so much for your attention and for the opportunity to be here to talk about something I really love, and to be a part of the Hill lecture series is, I would never expect that. So thank you so much. I have no, okay.
Good. Okay. Thanks for asking the real time.
First of all, congratulations on that tremendous body of work. Really very impressive. And I wonder if your new SANS fingerprint will be used to select astronauts for Mars, because you wouldn't want to send any of the ones who are going to get severe SANS.
Yeah, so yes. So the question was, since we know that SANS repeats, that would we use that knowledge to inform us as to who we should select for Mars missions? I will say right off the bat, that is like the first question the crew members ask. They're a little concerned about that. My response is that my intent is that we will develop countermeasures that will allow anyone to fly. That's my goal. Now, I can't control those above me. Maybe someone at some point may take that position, but my goal is to develop countermeasures so that anyone can fly. However, what we do recommend is anyone that goes on extended duration missions beyond 12 months, especially to Mars, they should be on at least a 30-day mission, maybe in low Earth orbit, so that we can diagnose them with SANS or non-SANS. And then that way, we'll at least know what to expect if and when they go on that extended duration mission. I try to take a positive approach on that. Yes.
Do you look at all the severity or susceptibility of SANS tests in general, like refractive error or axial?
So the question is, have we? I'll make sure I understand. So have we looked at how refractive error is how that shift occurs? Is it the flattening or? Oh, a risk for the development of SANS. Oh, gotcha. Does refractive error, baseline refractive error, play a role in SANS severity? We have not detected any red flags that indicates that, say, a 5-diopter myope will develop more severe SANS than a 2-diopter hyperope or anything like that. That, again, I go back to the statement that it's fascinating, it's exciting, but it's so frustrating because questions that seem like they make sense and it should be fruitful if we investigate this. We have not captured any red flags. So no, we have not determined that. We have not detected that.
Tyson, I will have to say that I believe Dr. Hill is quite proud at this moment looking down. If he showed you the way, you took the way and ran down that path. And I think for many of you thinking, well, that was a master class in how to give a 1-hour talk and tell a compelling story. You had a compelling story to tell, but you're a compelling storyteller. So
Thank you.
with that, this
Oh.
is the 2026 Hill Medal.
Oh,
Congratulations. So I can ship it
amazing.
home for you. So
Thank you so
congratulations.
much. Wow.
And thank you all for coming, and attendees online. Thank you for joining us, and everybody have a nice rest of your evening.